So we start from our side, University of Marburg. From my team at the NaDiMa project, I would like to welcome all of you for participating in our today online dialogue regarding natural disaster management. So my name is Mohammad Reza Farzanegan. So I would start a very brief introduction regarding the background of this project. And after my brief introduction, we are here to listen to two fantastic presentations regarding the natural disaster management in Germany and Iran, in which my colleagues, Puyal Dini, will be also the moderator here. So NaDiMa project is going to be a project that is going to discuss the topics related to natural disaster management. A very brief introduction to the agenda, what we are doing today. As I said, a brief introduction from my side, and then an introduction of the speakers by moderator Mr. Alaidini. We have two speakers, one from Germany and the other from Iran. Dr. Fekete will reflect on the issue of disaster management in Germany, and my colleague Dr. Fardanesh will deliver his talk regarding the Iranian perspective. And at the end, we would have a question and answering session, so feel free to write your question in the chat room. If the question is that a specific presenter, just also mention the name of the person that you want to address your question. And my colleagues at the end will collect these questions and will ask the presenters for the feedback and other suggestions that they may have. So feel free to do this. We would have around 30 minutes at the end for these question and answering and feedback session. From NaREM to NaDiMa, these are two interrelated projects. So if I want to give a very brief and fast introduction to NaDiMa in 2020, I need to start from project NaREM, the natural resource management, political economy of natural resource management that we started in 2016 with Iran. And for 3 years, we had about 6 seasonal schools, one in Iran and the other in Germany, on different topics on the natural resource management issues, mostly from political economy perspective. So we were quite happy, and we received good feedback from the students, from the lecturers, both in Iran and Germany, about their experience with this academic exchange, which we got also very good support from the other project and also the GESAM, the Federal Foreign Office. So that experience between 2016 and 2018 motivated us to continue this collaboration with Iran. And in the year 2020, we were successful to get the projects on the NaDiMa, the socio-economic and cultural and technical aspects of natural disaster management. And this project also supported by the ADE and also the GESAMT in Germany. The innovative part of this project is, of course, we have some more new partners, both in Germany and Iran. We are working with the University of Tehran, the Islamic Azad University, and let's say we have also a collaboration with Iran Strong Motion Network, Research Center in Iran. And in Germany, we are collaborating with the University of Freiburg. So some new partners, but more important aspects of this collaboration is interdisciplinary nature. So we are not only working with the economics or social sciences, but also in this project we have interaction with the people from technical and engineering backgrounds, so earthquake engineering and other relevant disciplines. So we are very much happy that this project was supported by the ADE for this year. So originally we were hoping to have some traditional seasonal schools, so bring students to Germany and Iran. But due to the COVID-19 situation, we have shifted to a series of online dialogues We are planning 6 of such dialogues this year, and that is possible for you to participate in them, and especially for the students who would like at the end receive also a certificate from the NaDiMa projects. It is required that you follow up all these webinars, dialogues, and prepare summary and protocol following each of these dialogues. So if you have any specific question about that part, my colleagues at the NaDiMa team will be happy to answer it. So our plan for 2020, you see that on the left-hand side, and the information on the project itself, the poster, is also on the right-hand side. I would be very happy to start this now. I am looking at the list of participants and presenters, so we are almost full here, and we are very happy that you also planned this time to come to our meeting today. But Puya Aladdini, who is going to moderate it at the technical issues at the beginning, but fortunately both of our speakers are here, Dr. Fekete from Germany and Dr. KARZIN Fardanesh from Iran. Well, the moderator, which also hopefully will join us during this session, is from Faculty of Social Science, University of Tehran. Puya Aladdini cooperated with us in the NaREM projects for over 3 years, so we had a very wonderful experience of collaboration with his team in University of Tehran. So we are also happy to continue this collaboration this year on the natural disaster management. We are very happy that we were able to win 2 speakers which are going to give us an overview of disaster management on one side in Germany and the other side from Iran. Dr. Alexander Fekete is Professor of Risk and Crisis Management at the Technische Hochschule Köln. So he had done many research and projects in the field of disaster management. He has been also been involved in some projects with reference to Iran. So he's an excellent candidate to give us an overview of how the disaster management system works in Germany as an introduction. And Dr. KARZIN Fardanesh also has been involved in many international and domestic projects regarding urban planning, has been advising United Nations, World Bank on variety of projects, has been collaborating with Dr. Aladdini on the important national projects in Iran, and is going to deliver his talk also from the Iranian perspective, how disaster management, who are the players, which institutions are working, and so on and so forth. So I stop here and give the space to Dr. Fekete to start his presentation. So we are planning around 20 to 25 minutes presentation each, and we would have around 30 minutes at the end question and answer sessions. So feel free to raise your comments and let us know if you have any specific questions here that we can help to answer it. So thank you very much from my side. I'll stop here and we listen to the presentation of Dr. Fekete. Dr. Fekete, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction and being invited to this very interesting and important webinar and also series that you're doing. I congratulate the University of Marburg and all of you to be here today. Also welcome to the students. It is great that you have an interest in Germany, and I'd like to present to you in the next 20 minutes or so some examples of natural hazards. And if there's any trouble in understanding me or my audio, please let me know, and I'm happy to answer questions also after my slides. So you see already the first slide. It is a photo I have taken during a river flood in East Germany in 2006. And you see that it's a matter of flooded streets, and it's a fireman standing there with a lot of pumps. So that is the very typical problem we have here with natural hazards. It's quite different to Iran, you will see. Germany is a small country in comparison to Iran. We have 83 million people. On the map on the left, you see the major cities we have, 4 of them with 1 million or more. And I'm based in Cologne. Cologne is the city in the west. It's the red dot on the left. And Cologne, or Köln as we say, is a city of 1 million people, and our university is based there, but many other universities too. And Marburg is closely next to Frankfurt, I would say. Now, if you're looking at disasters in Germany, you can look at the statistics, and the statistics tell you that within the range of 100 years into the past, Germany has seen mainly the types of extreme temperature. So that is either in winter when it's cold or hot in summer, but it's not even comparable to the temperatures you have in Iran, and still we are having trouble with it. And you see that the highest number of deaths is on the upper right. It's the total deaths of up to 9,000 people in Germany that have died during a heat wave in 2003. And then you see that we have floods, storms, and mainly those temperatures. And if you want some of the papers, I put in as a QR code, but you can also have my slides later on. Now, the most significant impacts are in terms of people being killed. That is the red box. And then you see the top one is the heat wave, followed by storm events. And the second in orange color is the affected people. So most people affected by floods or storms either have to be evacuated or treated in hospital or else. So it's a rough number and calculation, and you see that in both cases the numbers are much lower than in Iran, I suspect. And finally on the right you see the box on damage. Damages are quite high in US dollars because in Germany a lot of industrial areas, but also human settlements have been damaged, and there's also a lot of insurance on it. And this is quite typical for Germany, so there's a lot of economic damage to expect from natural hazards. First from floods, storms, and then the heat wave in the past 100 years. I'd like to introduce you now to the natural disaster risk management structure in Germany. And the first surprising information for you might be there's no national risk management authority in Germany dealing with natural hazards per se. So I will show you in a minute, but I'd say the most important official arm to do natural disaster risk management in Germany is by civil protection. And in civil protection you see two maps here. So the left box shows that actually CP, or civil protection, only officially functions in case of a war based on our law. So that means that the federal government is only responsible for natural hazards of any type if it's not responsible actually. It's only responsible for matters of human activities like war. However, on the right box you see that civil protection in peacetime is by law in the hand of the so-called federal states or Bundesländer. We have 16 of those. You can imagine them like larger provinces. They have autonomy, and they don't want to give the autonomy also to the national government. So this is quite typical for Germany to have this distribution. But in reality, of course, the national government and the national forces help the states in case of a flood or a storm or an earthquake. So they can offer help, but by law, they actually are not in the role of first response here. On the next slide, thank you very much, you can see civil protection at national level is distributed under different columns. So there's intelligence, police, the civil protection I was talking about, and the army or armed forces, and they are run by different parts of the government. So intelligence is shared with the head of states, Chancellor Merkel, maybe you heard in the TV news, and the Ministry of Interior is responsible for police and for civil protection as well, whereas the DOD, Department of Defense, is responsible for the armed forces, who also work in natural hazard cases, but not very often, as you will see. It is also organized in terms of who does what. So the ministry itself, the Ministry of Interior, only is responsible for planning the strategy, the political aspects of it. Who is doing the real work is either the planning by the Federal Office of Civil Protection and Disaster Assistance, the lower left part, and the lower right part shows you the Technisches Hilfswerk. This is responsible for relief operations. And the next slide shows you now that the organization in Germany is based on the hands or on many people who are professionals, but even many more who are volunteers. And this often is an interest from countries abroad. So what does volunteerism mean? Volunteerism means that it is many people who are officially having a job, but if they are helping in case of natural hazard, they are kind of volunteers in terms that they are trained, they're professional, they know how to handle technical gear and other equipment, but they are not paid by the government, not like the DABOM organized. It's quite different. It's a little bit different, let's say, but you see that's a very high number of volunteers, 1.7 distributed among several organizations. And one of them you have in Iran too is the International Federation of Red Crescent, in your case, in our case, the Red Cross. The operational forces I had introduced, in English translation would be Technical Relief Agency, the Technische Hilfswerk. And these are the people doing all the pumping in case of a flood or in earthquakes. They are doing the search and rescue, and they have a lot of equipment. And they are organized as being 1,800 who are employed somehow, but the large share, again, 80,000 are trained volunteers. You can see on the images only dogs, boats, all technical equipment, but it's also a matter of social and cultural organization. Try to maintain a working force of 80,000 people means a lot of work to gain people, to attract them into this voluntary work. Now the final slide on presenting how it is organized in Germany, you can see it by this triangle that shows which level is basically responsible and acts first. And this principle we call subsidiarity means that the municipalities at the bottom of this pyramid are responsible first. So every single mayor in every village or city is responsible first to respond to anything, be it a storm, a drought, a flood, or anything else. Only if they cannot cope with it anymore, if they don't have the resources, or it's just too big for them, they ask for the higher levels, which is the towns and counties, then the state, the federal state, and finally only on top, in very rare cases, the national government. Because you can see again, they're only actually at the top responsible if there would be a war. Now I'd like to show you some examples of natural hazards that have been taking place in Germany. And the first, actually, the headline says World War II in 1939 to 1945 was not a natural hazard. It was a major significant event for our history, in which over 50, some even claim up to 80 million people were killed in over 25 countries. And immediately after this destruction and the war in Germany, Germany was hit, as well as other European countries, by a very cold winter, which meant that people on the photo you can see were in the streets protesting, saying, we want to have more bread, we need food, because there was hunger and not a lot left after World War II, of course, and the destruction. And very often we try to explain the history of natural hazards since this historic landmark, the World War II event. I show you now some examples. On this picture you see a storm surge happening in northern Germany. I put it on a map in the red box in the north of our country in 1962. So that meant after the World War, this was one major event where some cities were hit and residents were flooded. It was a coastal storm that reached into the northern coastal cities in Hamburg, Bremen, Bremerhaven, and so on. And the impacts were a tide level, that is the increase by the sea level, plus the storm, which resulted in dike overtopping and breaches of defenses because they were poorly constructed or after the war not maintained well. 340 people killed, and it revealed management problems. So the responsibilities were unclear, how to deal with such a disaster. It was a late reaction to actually call for external help. And then when the army was called in, it was also of a major significance because especially after World War II, Germany had a big problem in using the army for anything, even in peacetime. And as a reaction and lesson learned, we can say the dike standards were massively improved, and as in with many of the events worldwide, Germany learned from the natural hazards. Another important event was a forest fire in also northern Germany in 1975. It is also a very recent topic since we have forest fires now since 2018 and even this year. Quite often we assume it's due to climate change. However, the impacts of that fire in 75 were that a lot of forest was destroyed, of course, but the major concern for German society was the poor organization of that response. There were 7 people killed, 5 professional firemen and 2 helping people. And the management problems were also a late reaction. It was also a kind of mentality in one of the bosses or the organization managers who claimed that this is our fire, so let us extinguish it ourselves. And it went too big, they couldn't do it, asking for help late. And that means it was one of the major problems. So the second was also there was a lack of water, rivers or lakes nearby to extinguish the fire. And as a lesson learned or reaction, water bodies or artificial lakes will be deployed in order to help for future fires in forests. But not everywhere, unfortunately, so we're still having a massive problem with that. And you might know in Tehran, there's also the Chitgar Park, where you also have an artificial lake for several purposes. Another important suite of events, a series of events, is river flooding in Germany. So you see an image on the right where the river is in eastern Germany. You see another map on the left, which I did in my research on the social vulnerability. So I was looking at the question, are more poor people affected in Germany? Are unemployed people affected more? Old people? And who has trouble in coping with such a flood? On the timeline, you see there have been several floods occurring in recent times, from 1993 in my city, Cologne, up to 2013. And you also see that it is a recent topic in Germany, but mainly to flash floods, or how we call it, storms, storm water, or pluvial floods. The impacts were that it was a lot of rain per day, so similar to what you've experienced last year in Iran, I think, a lot of heavy rain events also. 21 people killed, so by that you see it's low in comparison to many other countries, but a lot of economic damage. And also agricultural fields were damaged as well. The problems that were observed, again, were in management. It was first in awareness. Many responsible administrations reacted late. Some reacted faster, and later on it took a lot of studies to identify the reasons for this difference in risk governance, as we call it. Another trouble is that the warning system, the early warning, was poor, because a lot of the signals and sirens, the audio warning system, have been deinstalled because they were not used for a long time. Reactions were a lot of damage compensation in up to 700 billion euro, and this also resulted into a damage defense and dike defense system, And what many people in Germany don't know, 50% was paid by the European Union. Now the last event I want to show is a heat wave that has hit not only Germany but whole Europe. You see it on the map on the right, the dark red and purple colors, with a huge concentration in our neighboring countries like France and also Italy, but also Germany was affected. And the impacts were high degrees. In Tehran and in Iran you have Yazd, much higher temperatures of course, but in Germany it's unusual, which led to an additional 3,000 people being killed in only that 1 year in 2003. Mainly due to lung problems and elderly citizens and management problems, not only in Germany, where again awareness and training, for example, and warning, I'm sorry, there is no early warning system for droughts in Germany really existing. We now have a monitoring, but that is still under development, although we have more and more hot summers due to climate change continuously in the past 10 years or so. Okay, I want to finish off with a few remarks on early warning systems because I heard this is of interest to you. There's no real early warning system only for natural hazards in Germany. But what is very much known is the German Weather Service. So on the television stations, on the radio, on the internet media, the DWD, the National Weather Service, takes a lot of natural hazards warning, storms, floods included somehow. And of course, they're designated individual authorities, ministries, and research institutions. But for multiple hazards, we mainly have this organization and also a joint information center by the Civil Protection, the National Civil Protection System. We have end-user applications, so people in Germany know it mainly by social media apps or by television or newspaper content. And the challenges are that we are having those apps, but those apps are not known or used by many people still, and we still need the old systems. But the challenges you see is that a lot of the sirens, the audio, the noise generating warning tools were deinstalled because they were not maintained and used for a long time. We also have digital radio broadcasting, but it's not shared by all organizations, which is another problem. We have local communities who do not have a specified early warning system useful for them, so they're building up slowly their own systems. We want to look into nowcasting, so be quicker in response. For example, a local fire brigade told me they would be very happy to receive an information about an upcoming storm event 20 minutes earlier than before, because 20 minutes can save a lot of lives. And the final problem, of course, is how do people accept warnings? If there's not enough warning, people forget about it. They deinstall the mobile apps. If there's too often a warning and then it's not severe enough, then people say, well, they're overreacting. And a lot can be observed in the current corona crisis, I can tell you, so it's quite an interesting case to observe, but we don't regard that as a natural hazard. Final slide is that we also have a huge interest in learning from Iran, especially certain people and working groups, and myself, I've been honored to be in Iran as a student doing my master thesis long time ago in a dry set map project. The main idea was to show on satellite mapping how it can be useful for several purposes, irrigation systems, geological observation, and so on. And I worked there to record landslides around the Alborz Mountains, Karaj, KARZIN, and Tehran. And last year or the year before, we had another project, INCOR, where we are looking at how infrastructure like water, IT, power, roads are important in case of a disaster, and how Iran copes with it and what we can learn from Iran, but also in exchange from Germany. And the map on the lower right, you see I've been mapping the urban expansion, which is huge around Tehran, which was only gray area in the 1970s. From Karaj, you don't see anything, but it has grown to over 1 million inhabitants or so, with a lot of migrants. So early warning, but combining different hazards, not only earthquakes, also floods and dust storm and others are of interest. and learning also how you deal with urban growth. And finally, my special area is vulnerability and resilience, and that is of interest for many practitioners, not only academics here in Germany as well. Thanks very much for listening to my presentation. If you want to learn more about our project that I just briefly presented, you can take the QR code.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fekete, for this wonderful presentation. I see Dr. Alaeddini also here.
And I'm happy to take any questions.
He wanted to join us to introduce the next presenter, Dr. KARZIN Fardanesh. Dr. Alaeddini, are you able to activate your audio or video?
Yes.
Oh. Hello?
Hello, everybody. Hopefully, you can hear me. I see that. I guess I'm in. I apologize for the earlier inconvenience. I was not able to connect, or I was kicked out for a few minutes. It's a pleasure to be a part of this event, this particular event and this program, which will continue through 5 other webinars, 5 other sessions. I enjoyed very much Professor Alexander Fekete's presentation. Indeed, a large part of disasters are connected, are globally connected at the regional level or the global level. So it's very important for us to share experiences and talk about these issues. It's a pleasure now to introduce Dr. KARZIN Fardanesh, who has a long record of working on disaster management issues. He started out working for the Housing Foundation, and he has been an academic, worked for many years at the university, at Shahid Beheshti University or the National University. He has led several efforts with as a consultant with international organizations, and he directed a major project in Iran on urban informal settlements a few years ago with the World Bank. He has also worked for with UNESCO, and in particular with UN Habitat in the recent period. So, and the president, he will explain himself much better than me, that he's been working on this project to develop a framework for disaster management in Iran, and he's presenting the results of that those activities. So I give the podium to the virtual podium to Dr. Fardanesh.
Thank you, Dr. Alaeddini. Hope I'm now able to thank both the organizers of NaDiMa project for inviting me to make a presentation, as well as the illuminating presentation made by Professor Fekete. I think what I should do is more concentrate on the lessons that we have learned during these years that Iran has been dealing with different types of disasters. So as mentioned, I would like to present a few lessons that we have learned over the past years dealing with types of disasters that Iran is usually facing. These include not only earthquakes, but also disasters such as flood, such as wars, such as pandemics, the recent COVID-19, but also similar things like cholera and those things before during the World War I. in this presentation, I would like to more concentrate on the content rather than providing you with statistics and information, and more concentrate on the areas that we have before us as common areas for research and joint undertakings, as is more relevant to the nature of NaDiMa project. Let me take you to the presentation. Let's go back about 200 years ago, more than 200 years ago, and start with one of the famous earthquakes in KASHAN, which happened in 1778 in 18th century. At the time, it was during the reign of Karim Khan, one of the dynasties, a very short-lived dynasty of one king in Iran. And at the time, of course, there were no ministers, no ministries, no army of engineers, no seismologists, no universities, none of the technical capacity that Iran and many countries enjoy today. The whole reconstruction process, which was led by the government at the time after the KASHAN earthquake, and you see pictures of it, was led by a certain ruler called Abdul Razak Khan. And what he did was that he concentrated on rebuilding the bazaar, to some extent repairing the cisterns, the abambars, as well as the qanats, or the subterranean quarries or subterranean water channels, in order to revive the agriculture. This earthquake was shortly followed by another earthquake in Tabriz, and then the bazaar of Tabriz was built, again more or less in the same period, and it's now one of the World Heritage Properties of Iran, which again you have one of the big ones. Here you see one extreme of government assistance towards a reconstruction. That is, that the government does not concern the structures, but concerns more the recovery, the economic recovery, and the spending on the major shared community buildings or infrastructure. And next, or the other extreme, and next experience I would like to bring your attention to, is what happened about 200 years ago, 2 centuries later, in the KARZIN earthquake of 1970s. Then, of course, the government was in a totally different situation. We had oil revenues, there was the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development new established, there were armies of engineers, there were prominent universities in the country, there were research centers, BHRC and IIES and those things. And so what happened was that almost immediately after the earthquake, some 70 days after the earthquake, a full reconstruction plan was prepared and adopted by the Planning and Budget Organization, the theme of which was to modernize the disaster-stricken area. And what happened was that the engineers built houses, the pictures of them you see, in a very earthquake-resistant fashion. As you see, these houses are very strong structures, shell structures, resistant to earthquakes, built of concrete, and they are actually absolutely strong structures. The only problem with this approach was that they were never occupied. As you see, they're still empty. People did not use them. The villagers did not use them. Maybe they used them a little bit for their cattle, but actually they were virtually vacant. And people started to build their own houses according to their own tradition. So this is the other extreme. Now I'll go to another example, and that's the long reconstruction period of post-war reconstruction, but actually it was during the war. And it was all continuing during the Iran-Iraq war between 1980s to all the way up until 1990s. And there was a gradual move from the technical aspect from one extreme to the participatory aspect. And this culminated in the 1990 MANJIL earthquake, and the whole lesson could be actually summarized in this drawing you see on the right. And this is the drawing which was presented to the government, to the cabinet, when they were deciding on the approach the approach of the government. And this is the cartoon actually I drew for the cabinet meeting. And as you see, at the time, there were no PowerPoint presentations, much less these Adobe Connect things and these gadgets. And everything was done in hand. But it summarizes basically the two extremes and the approaches you can take. On the upper picture, you see that the approach is that the government starts to design, plan, and build houses in a very urban manner, with all the government officials working on it, and the people, mainly the villagers, watch. The second, the middle row, shows that the government just reports what the people are doing, and they start building, not building back better, but building the same thing that they used to do. And there is no improvement in the construction. While the approach which was suggested was that the government will provide supervision, will provide assistance, will provide technical assistance and other types of support, but people will take the lead in reconstruction. And this was the formal adoption and change of policies which governed the whole government response during the years to come. Nevertheless, to have this approach in place, there were many issues which we had to solve one by one. So 1990 is a time when not only the government position is settled as a participatory approach, but also Housing Foundation, for example, was formally recognized as the official body responsible for housing reconstruction. There were many other incidents, but one important aspect, one which provided us with many other lessons and challenges, was the BAM earthquake, which happened in late night December 2003, and actually continued throughout 2004. Here we had serious challenges which we had to cope with. One was that BAM soon became a World Heritage property. It was inscribed on the World Heritage list on an emergency basis, and it was a major part of the city and a major part of this World Heritage property with all its implications such as the authenticity and integrity tests and the World Heritage criteria and the need for conservation in addition to rapid reconstruction. The next point was that in BAM, we were doing a reconstruction in a city, or in a small town where we had engineers, we had municipality, and we had technical aspects involved. We had new materials and new actors were also closely involved, and there were also regulations. The next challenge in BAM was that the economy and livelihoods was totally different to a village, where people usually rely on agriculture and their domestic, let's say cattle and those things, or agriculture, which are not that seriously affected. But in a city, people rely on commerce. People rely on shops and production and those things. And this had to be also taken care of. This marked another major challenge and a change or a need for a change in government policies regarding the reconstruction work. BAM earthquake, for example, provided an opportunity for the Housing Foundation to settle this big, for example, exposition where people could choose between construction materials and techniques. And they had to forge also a way to cooperate between engineering disciplinary organization, all the other technical bodies involved in reconstruction, as well as the international community who were also supporting this huge disaster in a humanitarian fashion. And all of this had to be taken into consideration, and the government had to develop a set of working modalities. In BAM, many lessons were learned, and many of them were put into action in the KERMANSHAH earthquake in 2017. KERMANSHAH earthquake was also very vast, although it was not big on the Richter scale. It affected a huge area, and the aftershocks, which amounted to something like 1,000 aftershocks, many of which were above 5 on the Richter scale, produced serious, actually, damages in terms of housing, in terms of affecting the economy, and in terms of affecting the remote areas where you had a lot of villagers and populations whose income was also very diverse and varied in nature. KERMANSHAH was also one of the least employed provinces of the country at the time. So again, you had an employment problem, also the issue of informal settlements, in addition to a series of other problems. And this is a more recent experience that the authorities tried to develop their own system of response. I won't go into details, but the whole idea is that you have money, for example. It's government money, it's borrowed money, it's donated money from the international community or international donors, or it could be money in form of compensation. And you want to bring this money to people so that they would be able to build their houses in a better way, to respond to the Build Back Better principle already requested in many international instruments. Now, the organization which does that in Iran is Housing Foundation. But what Housing Foundation does is that it works in villages with masons and in cities with engineers who are also regulated by the engineering disciplinary organization. Means that the Housing Foundation has to provide them with training. They have to work with the people in order to see that the quality of the construction is better than what was before. It's more resilient. Nevertheless, to act more, Housing Foundation also works with the banks in Iran, for example, or it can work with other funding agencies in order to regulate the flow of the money based on the quality of construction. Housing Foundation also helps and assists with the removal of debris, with also provision of material in order to control the increased prices and the inflation on the price of materials, which usually happens during all reconstruction activities. So this is more or less the system which has been working. Now, as mentioned by Dr. Fekete, today we are now facing another type of disaster, this pandemic, this COVID-19 pandemic, which has left no physical damages, not like an earthquake or a flood, but has left a significant economic impact. There have been countries with different approaches to management of this problem. We have seen that people's role and the time when you interfere is of utmost importance. The diagrams you see below are the models I developed in order to calculate how the different policies would do. Actually, as seen in the models, if you act immediately or at the outset of the pandemic, you have a better chance of controlling the rise, as you would see the top part here, of the population affected. If you don't actually follow up with this, policy of control and having people's participation in the control of the epidemic, you will have another rise. And this is what is happening almost on this side of the earth, not only in Iran, but also in other Asian countries. And we are seeing a second rise in the number of population affected. These models, which I developed earlier, for seeing the impact of the policies, have already indicated that we have the need to bring on the people, because the people are those who are really affecting the situation. It's not that the government simply can do these things, but it's also the COVID-19 providing us with is that now, in addition, or contrary to what we used to do, that we just provided for reconstruction activities, we now have to provide mental health and psychosocial support. That is a more complete form of recovery we are working on. Now we go to the next slide. This is something you can easily find on the internet. The English version, I think, is also available. But all in all, what has happened is that we have a new disaster management law adopted in August 2019, almost a year ago. And this law is actually complementary to the cabinet adopted decision of 2005 and the law for establishing the National Disaster Management Organization, which was adopted in 2008. This new law actually provides for all the entities related to the government, in addition to those which are not at all related to the government, like, for example, the NGOs, the international donors, etc., to find their role within the system. So this document requires that a set of additional documents should also be prepared. The strategic plan has to be prepared, and national and provincial plans for disaster response, recovery, and preparedness have to be prepared, in addition to SOPs or operating procedures for implementing this law. Having said that, a recent activity which Dr. Aladdini referred to, and this is when I was actually working with UN Habitat, was the contribution to this law and the document that we prepared. And now, fortunately, based on that experience, we have also developed with UN Habitat and BHRC, as well as United Nations RC office, in addition to the national stakeholders, NDMO being the lead, of course, a new guideline for rehabilitation, recovery, and reconstruction. This guideline is now in draft form. It is supposed to be peer-reviewed, basically, by a set of scholars who are working closely with the BHRC. And it would soon be finalized, and it would provide a serious areas where we can actually institutionalize the lessons that we have so far learned from the disasters of the country. Now, just to summarize, I'll go into a set of lessons that we have learned over the past 200 years or 2.5 centuries period, and try to bring your attention to the areas which we have to work on. One major point is that, we need all disasters to have a support at the highest level possible. If you look at, for example, the situation of COVID-19 throughout the world, you would easily see that those countries where the president supported the response effort were more successful in managing the COVID-19, while in countries where the president simply, did not support the activity, the response, they had a worse situation. So it's very important to have a high-level support whenever we have a disaster. Nevertheless, the important point is that the authorities, in particular the high-level, high-ranking authorities, should cease from giving silly promises, ambitious promises, saying that, okay, we'll make reconstruction in 1 year or so, because this will increase expectations. They should give hope, but they should not give promises. Once they give silly promises, expectations raise and participation decreases. Another point is that there should be a consensus on who does what. Reconstruction policies have to be shared by all responsible agencies, in particular those which are NGOs, TBOs, and other intervening agencies such as the international donors. If they don't find their respective role, they're likely to more meddle than have a positive impact. The third point is that reconstruction should be as rapid as possible, but it is not achieved by pouring in machinery and money and making a swamp of every, other facility, but it should be done while we are having a very streamlined process. The next point is that shelter, for example, or recovery solutions should be diverse, because people have diverse needs. One size fits nobody in reconstruction and recovery process. So it should be as diverse as possible. Here, for example, we see an example of a temporary shelter, which was built by the students of Shahid Beheshti, actually university, and a group of professors. They used to implement these structures, which is, let's say, a stiffened model of an existing temporary shelter used by, let's say, shepherds, into a temporary shelter. And this proved very efficient because it costed something like 1/100 of the price of a Connex, which was the normal temporary shelter used in Kermanshah. Another important lesson that we have learned is that reconstruction should be followed actually simultaneously with recovery, meaning that reconstruction of the schools, hospitals, public spaces have to be followed up as seriously as the reconstruction of houses, for example. In particular, making provisions for the livelihoods of people and employment opportunities. And this is what we learned painstakingly when we were working in Kermanshah, for example. And finally, last but not least, is community participation. It's basically people's job, people's primary responsibility to tend to their lives and to reconstructing, rehabilitating, and recovering their existence and life. So having said that, I would like to thank you for your attention, for giving me this short period of time in order to share with you the lessons that we have learned over the past few decades. I would also like to thank the people who have contributed in one way or another to this presentation with their photos or with their understandings or with their inputs. And the names you see, I would not go through them for the sake of time. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farzin, for this wonderful presentation, perspective from Iranian side. Now we have time to start our question and answer session and feedback. So I would like to invite Dr. Alaeddini also to join us on the board, and Dr. Fekete as well. And Dr. Farzin, if he's also there beside you, I guess. Dr. Alaeddini. Dr. Alaeddini, we don't have your voice. Could you please turn on the microphone? No.
Do you have it now?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
Thank you very much. So,
okay, thank you very much. I can lead it. I saw that several persons asked questions first of Dr. Fekete. I think I noted 3 of them. He himself also responded that he would elaborate later on. One was about his experiences with nature-based actions in Germany. And then a second one was about the use of internet technology in disaster management in Germany. And then the role of other organizations, health centers, municipalities, again, based on his experiences in Germany. So maybe if Dr. Fekete, Professor Fekete can elaborate on these, and then we'll see what other questions come up.
Yes, thank you very much for the very good questions. I'm sorry that I might speak a bit fast, and I'm aware that not everyone can hear, but I'll try. So one question was also there about the coronavirus, maybe that we take later. But starting with the nature-based solutions, I think in Germany for river floods, we have tried to do a reforestation. We have tried to give space to rivers by building big retention basins, to carefully consider dike construction, where that actually can also turn out into be problem-based cases. And if you want to learn more, we're actually offering courses at my university, a master on ecosystem-based disaster risk reduction. So if you're looking for my university, there's also an open online course, a MOOC, on nature-based solutions. But that's a very interesting topic, and Germany tries to be more green, but it's often a challenge, especially in city areas where the space is contested. So some try to make more green space in cities to allow more infiltration rates, but that's often a challenge with the demands also of citizens who don't always like that, especially farmers might have protests and so on. So it's sometimes even a controversy. The second is about if I have experience about internet technology for early warning systems. Yes, not really myself. It is, I don't know what you mean by the question. One part is that internet is used at the moment to also analyze Twitter messages in case of any event, if people are responding to that. So that is some type of internet-based analysis. The second is the internet is connected now with almost everything, so any early warning system and distribution end is actually connected by internet more or less. I have also one more graph in my slides that I didn't present. I can show you the range of it. But sorry, if you have any special questions, please add. I didn't know exactly what you're asking about, but definitely it's a trend in Germany to connect everything to the internet, which is a problem by itself, because as soon as you're dependent on internet connectivity, you're also dependent on power supply. And if that breaks down, you cannot communicate anymore. So there needs to be alternatives as well. The third question on how the other organizations cooperate in Germany. We are doing projects together with the water bodies, so the water boards, who are actually first responsible to organize the river training and the river monitoring and also the early warning. However, in case of a severe disaster, it is also the mayor of the community and the civil protection organizations there. And in reality, they all work together in a so-called incident command structure. So imagine they're meeting all at a table, and in a crisis room, they exercise together with the private operators of water supply. 80% in Germany is given to companies of the infrastructure, such as water, power, and others. And the health centers, municipalities all participate, and it depends very much on the type and the scale of hazard. For example, within the corona crisis or corona situation, some give it into the hands of the health centers, and especially also on national level, corona and COVID-19 has been advised very much from the academic side by one or two important institutions. So this also worked well in cooperation with our national government. And this is what I think is successful in Germany in terms of also what we've heard before. So I wouldn't say in comparison to other countries in Europe, Germany is doing any better. It is largely a matter also of reporting and the statistics and the numbers. But I think we at least have had some experience with previous epidemics in Germany. And it worked quite well on the organizational part and the management, but on the other hand, many people in Germany were very surprised, and wearing a face mask like all of you do, it takes many people to go on the streets and protest. There's some social unrest about it also, so it's not exactly an easy picture, but I'd say overall, yes, we are doing quite okay with the corona situation, and we have to learn more about it, so also learn maybe from other countries. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
Questions maybe also later. You moderate, you know, there's more questions coming in.
Okay. Yes, yes. I'll pose a few of the questions to Dr. Fardanesh. One is about the from a social policy perspective. In Iran, we have two types of institutions, the revolutionary types and the regular government types. And natural disaster is, in Iran is also, at least a major part of it, the responsibility has been given to the Housing Foundation. So do you think this works well, that the government, non-governmental and para-governmental revolutionary organizations working together? Is it working well? Is there a problem? Is there an issue? And a second question, let's pose that to you also. Do you think in the new framework that the government is developing now, are they including the climate change, or which is a major issue, should be a major issue in Iran right now? Can you please answer these two? And if you want, the role of NGOs, but we can also, Professor Fekete also should respond to that. That's a major question. How do you involve NGOs in natural disasters?
Well, first point is that I'm saying that people are seriously typing questions after questions. It's a very positive point that people are so interested in the discussion and they're asking. But for a presenter, it is one form of disaster. If one has to actually respond to all of these, questions. Number two, I might actually take away Dr. Alardini's name from the acknowledgements presentation because he's asked me 3 questions in one. That is also another source of response. But let's go from the first one about the role of the revolutionary organizations. Yes, in Iran, for example, Housing Foundations, which is not considered to be a governmental entity per se, is given the mandate of doing housing reconstruction. I do not see any problem with this type of arrangement because, first of all, you have an organization which is not relying on public budget for its existence. It comes in whenever there is a disaster, and it is refunded to what it does for the disaster reconstruction. And this arrangement, as long as it's a cooperation and collaboration, and then there is a coordination between different actors, has been working well in the past few decades. So as long as you have a clear-cut definition of responsibilities, who does what, and then there is an accountability on who responds to who gets money from who, and then where are the response lines. There is no difference if there is an NGO or if there is an international organization, or if there is a UN agency, for example, when it happens in similar neighboring countries to Iran, where there is no housing foundation, for example, UN Habitat does the same thing. As long as the principle of accountability, coordination, and collaboration is looked at, it's not a problem. What is interesting is that in the new law and the bylaws for it, in particular the Recovery and Reconstruction Plan, there is an effort to clarify these overlapping roles and to having a more clearly defined role for each organization. In particular, what has to be considered, which also relates to what was asked from Professor Fekete a moment ago, is about the databases, is about the information technology, which not only provides us with the opportunity to share information, but also provides us with the opportunity to synchronize our information. So this new, for example, plan has a provision for establishing a joint database where each organization keeps its own data, collects its own data, but everything is consolidated in one single database kept by NDMO. If this thing happens, it would actually efficiently increase the effectiveness of all interventions. And this is something which we have to all strive. The next question was about climate change. Yes, what have actually note is that not only disasters are becoming international, their impacts are becoming more and more international. People, get into war in Syria, but the impacts you see in form of migratory population in Germany. So it's like that in many other parts of the world. You see a drought in one corner of the world, you see drought in one country, you see, for example, let's say, what happens in the, swamps of Iraq, then the dust and the particles come all the way to Shiraz city, central Iran. So this is one major reason that we have to take climate change into consideration, because disasters are becoming more and more international. One is climate change. The other is the ease of mobility, which is happening. Look at, for example, the COVID-19 and compare it with SARS or the avian flu and those things, which were not pandemic, but this one became pandemic because of the ease of communication between countries. And the impacts also became international. The economic impact became international because of the fact that we are getting more and more interlinked. So what happens, for example, in a production factory in India affects the economy of Germany, for example, or other places. So yes, climate change, as well as other aspects of internationalism of disasters, if I may call it like that, have really to be taken seriously. It's not the problem of one country anymore. disasters are becoming more and more international. I think I have responded to many questions. If you like, I'm at your disposal, but I'll let Dr. Fekete to join as well and help.
Okay.
Well, thanks very much. I can only support what you've said, especially the expertise you have on international cooperation or different actors in your country, and the importance of highlighting that certain disaster types like droughts, climate change, earthquakes do not stop at the borders, and you have to consider cooperations. I can only support what you've said, and it's also great that we come together here because I learn a lot from you. And I'm especially interested in long construction after earthquakes, like I'm working also on some of the events in Iran. So there's a lot we can learn from your experience. And also I've seen in the question answers some people from Pakistan and elsewhere, you know, have much more experience than we do in Germany.
Dr. Alaeddini.
Okay, it's a bit difficult to monitor such a session. There are so many questions coming, so I have to sort of choose among them. Some of the main questions are, I don't know if I just lost the voice of Professor Fekete, but I don't know if he responded to the issue of the role of NGOs and then the role of the regional organizations like the EU in managing disasters. And then there is also a question about why Germany responded better. It appears that it responded better to the COVID-19 crisis. Is there something to learn from that? I think those were the questions. Can you sort of quickly respond to that? Then I will pose the rest of the questions to Dr. Fard.
Thank you very much. Yes. I'm also aware from the chat that maybe not everyone can hear what I'm saying, so I've responded to the question on the corona situation once more in written form. The question on the EU-wide disaster management plan, yes, we do have organizations in Europe who are responsible for planning and for making recommendations, but even operational forces. So that means, for example, we do have a European-wide natural disaster management plan for river floods. And the countries like Germany had to update their plans and was very efficient because it was very, you know, some counties in Germany did it before and some others didn't. And as soon as there was an official European legislation forcing everyone to produce risk maps for each and every municipality in Germany connected to river flood, that was very effective. The European Union also has a union of protection mechanism, which is especially was important during a banking crisis, but now also under Corona, to help and support each other. And it can be any topic. It can be a forest fire, it can be an epidemic or else. And this sees a lot of discussion these days. And maybe then another question was whether COVID-19 is something coming out from some manipulation of countries. You know, I think more important it is to think about how we can manage this virus on the long run. Because now we are already planning into next year, and to cope with a virus that is, say, deadly, but not many people want to be constrained, locked down at home and in home office anymore, can be a problem during winter. So that is the more important question than asking where did it start, I think. And the last question, late reaction, is a repeating theme in my slides. Very good observation. And indeed, to each and every those examples, there have been a lot of studies conducted in Germany. I can help you to find if you're interested in any specific example. And I'll also mention a textbook by David Alexander, who is a renowned expert not only in Great Britain, but also on Iran. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to pose one question to Dr. Fardanesh. It's apparently a twofold question. One is that about the building methods and building resilient cities and the issue of multiculturalism and whether or not we should sort of depopulate the cities or at least to have a some kind of a population plan so that we have less populated cities and then less hazard, less risk. Is that a possibility or not? That's, we would like to elaborate on that. And
I cannot hear you.
So we don't.
Yeah.
We don't have the voice of Dr. Fardanesh.
Do you have it now? Do you have? No. Okay. The questions are becoming. Yes. The questions are becoming more and more difficult now. I hope we would be able to last by the end of this session. The point is that actually a few years ago, just before all these disasters, that is about something like 10 years ago, there was an extensive study made, conducted in Iran in order to see whether we could move the capital city from Tehran to other cities. And the costs involved are so great that the result was that let's forget the problem. But that wasn't actually the solution. The fact that we have to rearrange and redistribute population means that we have also to make major changes in our political structure, in our task distribution, in how we are going to use our legal system, our economy, the, let's say, production places. It's a very big problem. It's easily stated, but the solution is not that simple. So we are basically talking about a new territorial plan all the way to the master plans, to the detailed city plan and all that, and it requires a lot of reform. What we have to say is that in a short term, if we are thinking about another COVID-19, COVID-20, COVID-21, for example, attack, what we have to do is that we have to prepare for such a situation. If we want to be prepared in a short term, it means that first and foremost, we have to rely more on the city planning, on revised commutation policies, and try to develop zones which we can quarantine altogether. Means that we have to have more self-sufficient neighborhoods rather than having a city like Tehran which depends for its commerce on the bazaar per se, as an example. And this is the first step. But the answer is that there is no short-term response to such a question. This general redistribution of population in mega cities and in a country is not something you can achieve overnight, and it demands serious studies and a gradual move. Short term, what you can do is that try to move towards a self-sufficiency for different zones and different cities so that you would be able to protect them and respond to their post-disaster needs, for example, as soon as possible. And this is in line with the redundancy principle of resilience. This is what I have to say for the time being.
Okay, thank you very much.
okay, thank
My
you.
question is, how much time we have?
How much time we have?
We have.
Do we have any more time, Dr. Farzan?
8 minutes.
Around 8 minutes. Okay. Let me see what I want, which question I want to answer or pose to. I think, I don't know if the issue of participation, community participation was elaborated on enough. I don't know whether Dr. Fardanesh or Dr. Fekete want to answer that. This is a major issue in Iran. Maybe in a country like Japan, you see a lot of participation, community participation. But in other countries, you don't see much of it. Can you how can you plan for that? How can you ensure that there is more community participation? Um, can you create an incentive structure for community participation, or what do you have to do? Um, I think that maybe, can you both answer that? First, Dr. Fardanish, and then, first Dr. Fekete, then Dr. Fardanish, if you could respond to that, the issue of, because this is a major problem especially in developing countries. Professor Fekete,
yes, thank you very much. So I can only say first a few words about Germany, and my observation is that participation is not a real problem here. So we do have a lot of people being engaged already by the high number of volunteers. Of course, this is trained volunteers, but we have also seen that many other people, spontaneous volunteers as we call them, they have been helping in events like a river flood. But the concern in dealing with that spontaneous group of volunteers is within the traditional organizations, because the traditional organizations think they can handle every disaster quite well. And in an event like a river flood during summer in 2013, many people organized themselves via social media and were suddenly appearing on site and wanting to help, which is great. But I think this can be comparable. I heard it also from other countries, also Iran, that people who are not trained, do not know what to do, and actually don't bring food and water to supply for themselves, often are, after a while, a problem to really include into the traditional operational forces schemes. So we have seen a lot of research projects and also trainings, how to involve people who are turning up on a disaster site. But that is only one form of participation. Another is civil society or NGOs. And we have very few NGOs in Germany on natural hazards because we hardly have natural hazards on a severe scale. And those organizations are very good, because they're working very much into their neighborhoods, they're dealing with the officials, with bureaucracy, but they also are very good now to, even after 10 years or more, to get connected to communities. And the third and last thing I want to tell is involvement can also happen by monetary involvement. And I think in Germany we have insurance coverage. Not everyone can get insurance or has insurance. So that's also a question, who wants to share the public costs of that? And very often after a large disaster, people are calling for the government to recompensate. But so these are the issues we are facing in Germany on participation. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Fardan.
Sure. Actually, I want to build on what Professor Fekete has just mentioned, and that is that participation actually has several levels. The first level is, of course, the people participating by donating money, by donating their means, those who are not affected helping those who are affected. And this is very much there in Iran, and it has been always there. The COVID-19, for example, people really started to helping each other to allocate money, resources, etc. But this is the first level. The second level is that when people start to, for example, do reconstruction of their houses, they take part in building back better their economy and their assets. Another level, and this has been also in place to some extent. But these two levels are only the first levels of a meaningful participation. Actual participation starts when people start deciding, for example, on what the master plan of their city should look like when they are making the reconstruction process. What the land use, which are usually taken in hands of the decision maker. Well, how are they participating in, for example, designing their village or the master plan of their village? Or how are they going to design their monitoring? This is These are the things which we have to still work on. The role of the people in the rehabilitation phase and in the monitoring phase. Are the people being given a say, or are they being given a voice into criticizing, for example, the government or the agency who were responsible for reconstruction, for their policy? Are they part of the learning process of the reconstruction, rehabilitation, disaster management organization? Are they helping meaningfully, contributing to the learning organization, to the, let's say, disaster response organization to become a learning organization? Are they being really asked questions, and are they being given a role into defining or revising the existing recovery and response policy in place? Is a question which we have to deal with. Here in this area, we're at the beginning of our, let's say, quest for meaningful participation. The first two levels, people, donating, people ensuring, people helping each other, we are more or less okay. People taking a role in reconstruction of their economy, their shops, or their houses, we are more or less there. But in real meaningful monitoring process, in real meaningful decision-making process, the opportunity to revise the construction policy, I think we are in the beginning of the road, and there have been infinitesimal provisions in the new plans which we have to actually build upon. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I guess our time is up. Dr. Farzanagan should say the...
Okay, thank you very much. So from my side, a big thank to our participants and the speakers and our nice moderator, Dr. Alaeddini, who managed this meeting very well. Of course, our first online dialogue, so there is always issue of technical things and coordination, and we hope to become better in the forthcoming online dialogues. So our plan is this year to have in total 6 such dialogues. 4 of them would be type of giving information regarding the overall situation of disaster management. So today was an introduction to the disaster management in Germany and Iran. So some comparative points presented by both Dr. Fekete and Dr. Fardanesh. I thank them again very much for this interesting and important contribution. From the future, so what we are planning is every month one of online dialogue. So the next one would be sometime at the end of August, and we would have another one in September, October, November, and December. So what we are planning to focus on a specific type of disaster. For example, the next dialogues would focus on the issue of earthquake, both from the Iranian and German perspectives. We have also online dialogues regarding the sandstorms, drought, water problems, and so on and so forth. And we are also planning the final 2 online dialogues, mostly from perspective of using the methods and data to analyze the disaster cases. So that would be probably more better fitting to the needs of students in this field. The partners which are collaborating with us, University of Tehran, 2 faculties in the University of Tehran are involved. One of them is Faculty of Social Science, which Dr. Alaeddini and his team are collaborating with us, and the Faculty of Natural Resources, Dr. Nazari, is contributing to this project. We have colleagues from the field of engineering, earthquake engineering, from the Iran Strong Motion Network Research Center, and from Islamic Azad University. Also, they are going to contribute to some of these online dialogues. So we try to keep a balance between Iran perspective and German perspective in these dialogues by inviting the speakers from both countries as much as possible and feasible for us. And this is our plan to establish a dialogue, a sustainable dialogue on this very important topic for both countries, not only for Iran but also Germany. Just the types of disasters are different, and learning from the experience of both sides, and trying to keep this link for future. So we are planning also for the next 2 years to continue this project. I mentioned before, we had a similar collaboration with Iran before Corona, of course, from 2016 to 2018, and we managed to organize 6 seasonal schools. So now the Corona has just changed the shape of collaboration that we have from traditional presence, which we find it also interesting, of course, to a form of online ones as the second best. So we are trying to make the best from this opportunity, and despite this COVID-19 situation, we keep this academic collaboration between these two countries. Again, I'm very thankful to the financial support of the ADEJ, the German Academic Exchange Service, which supporting these projects within their program of higher education dialogue with Muslim world, and also the GESAMT in Germany, the Federal Foreign Office in Germany, which is supporting this project. And I also appreciate the collaboration of all our partners, and I'm also very happy that you all managed to come to our today meeting. So more than 100 participants were online today, and I do hope that we continue this collaboration in the forthcoming months in the year 2020 and beyond. So this from my perspective. If Dr. Fekete or Dr. Alaeddini want to add to this, we are here. I also thank my team in Marburg, NaDiMa team, Sven Fischer, Peter, and Noak, and Clara Golish, who also in the logistic part supported us very much. Also the University of Marburg, which provided this opportunity for us to start this series of online dialogue, which we hope to continue it and finish it successfully this year. So this was from my part. If Dr. Fekete, you want to say your maybe last comments, and Dr. Alaeddini or Dr. Farzin Fardanesh, they want to add something.
Thank you very much for this very interesting invitation. Thanks for having me around, and also to all the students and guests here around for your nice and interested question. You were very active. I was very much amazed about that. Good luck and good health.
I don't have any comments. Thanks to everybody, and Dr. Fardanesh, if you have some comments, be happy.
Well, I think I have spoken too much in this session. I just want to stop by saying that I'm thankful to the organizers for having invited me to give this presentation, and very much also thankful to the audience who have made pertinent questions, which are really food for thought, basically. And I'm sorry I'm too close to the webcam, and you probably can just see one eye, I presume. So having said that, I would like to thank everybody, and that's it. Thank you.
So thanks again, everybody, and with these final comments, we would like to conclude the first online dialogue of NaDiMa series, and looking forward for future dialogues in this series. Thank you.
Bye.